Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. How stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Coffee. Without it, we would never have had the Industrial Revolution. We'd all be still living in Europe in mud huts. Here in Laredo, we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike. 4501 McPherson, the best coffee on the planet. If you can't get to Laredo, you can order from the Organic Man Coffee Trike .shop. Welcome to the show. I am your host, Chris James. Tonight we're going to be talking about flying jellyfish. Born in 1874 in Albany, New York, Charles Fort was working as a newspaper reporter before he was aged 20. He wanted to become a writer, so he traveled the world looking for experiences to write about. While in South Africa, Fort contracted a fever that nearly killed him, forcing him to return to New York. He married his nurse, Anna Filling, and they embarked on a career as a freelance writer. Fort spent hours on end in the library pursuing his interests in nature and behavior. While paging through old newspapers and scientific journals, he began to notice repeated chronicled oddities of the physical world, reports of strange aerial phenomena. Fort was able to write 4 books based on his research and investigations. He speculated there was a species of nearly transparent jellyfish that float in the upper atmosphere. Over the years, pilots have reported seeing odd-shaped objects in the sky they thought resembled jellyfish. People have found large numbers of dead birds with burn marks on them, which they believe could be caused by these jellyfish stings. There have been numerous rainstorms where thick jelly-like substance has been found after the rain. Some folks today think the sightings of jellyfish-like objects is a new phenomenon. It's been around at least 200 years based on Fort's writing. People will ask, if these creatures exist, then why aren't there more sightings? People who believe in the flying jellyfish suggest they might have a ability to change color and blend in with the background of the sky, like how an octopus can blend into the seafloor. A proof of these creatures might be found in Oakville, Washington. Oakville is a little town located along U.S. Highway 12 between Elma and Rochester. About 1,000 people live there, and it's known for being the site of the annual Zucchini Festival, and it was the last horseback bank robbery in Washington state. The town is also known for the 1994 rainstorm that delivered a bizarre substance. The strange rain fell twice. August 7th, Sunny Barcliff looked out through the rain at the black asphalt roof of a small shed on her property. She noticed it was covered with several globules that looked kind of like grains of rice, only a lot bigger. When she and others picked up some of the globs, they saw they were clear and they had a jelly-like texture. Shortly after handling the material, Barcliff and 2 other people went to the hospital, suffering from fatigue and nausea. A few days later, a cat that had lived outside of Barcliff's home died of a strange intestinal problem. August 16th, another rainstorm brought more of the gelatinous blobs to Oakville. The National Weather Service received phone call from an unidentified man who said hot metal fragments had rained down from the sky, burning holes through his children's trampoline. There were no physical reports during the second rainstorm. A local doctor doubted the strange material could have caused any human illness, and he suggested that the cat had drank antifreeze, which had probably led to its death. All the same, he had a lab examine samples of the blobs. The initial analysis suggested they contained many different substances, including human white blood cells. The doctor thought they could have come from the waste fluid on an airplane toilet, which could explain the human cells as well as antifreeze. However, airplane waste fluid is blue. The blobs were clear or white. Health authorities had a second analysis done, and this time the lab reversed the initial findings of the human white blood cells. Although there were living cells in the blobs, they had no nuclei as human cells do. At least, that's what they said. That left investigators with an unidentified living material falling out of the sky. Somebody suggested perhaps there was a different biological source. In early August, the U.S. Air Force conducted a series of live bombing exercises off the coast of Washington. Someone tried suggesting that the bombs had exploded in the middle of a school of jellyfish, blowing them to bits and launching the fragments into the atmosphere. These pieces were small enough to float along in the clouds until they came down in a rainstorm. It was also around this time that large numbers of dead crabs were found along the Washington coast, surrounded by small globs of jellyfish-like material. The couple who reported the dead crabs became ill after handling them. For this to be related to the Oakville globs, the material would have had to have floated for nearly 2 weeks over a distance of 70 miles from the bombing range to get to Oakville. Conspiracy theories, better known as spoiler alerts, suggest some form of germ warfare. In 1997, the show Unsolved Mysteries featured the Oakville rain. They interviewed several residents who had experienced the strange rain 3 years earlier. They reported the strange rain fell 6 times, and scientists found 2 different kinds of bacteria in the blobs. Several residents mentioned seeing black helicopters flying over the area at the time. Host Robert Stack stopped short of suggesting the United States government deliberately sent helicopters to leave toxic jelly blobs over Oakville. In 1997, the city of Everett also had a mysterious rain of gelatinous globs. Investigators tried to explain this substance away as being completely different from the Oakville incident. It has gotten to a point any time the authorities come out with an explanation for just about anything, you have to question their motivation for the explanation. Are they trying to cover something up they didn't want you to know about, something they may have done, or are they trying to hide unearthly explanations? One theory the government absolutely doesn't want you to consider is the blobs were the remains of flying jellyfish. Some say this was what happened when the jellyfish mate or have some kind of a social gathering. Others said there may have been some man-made cause, such as a plane or a rocket hitting a flock of flying creatures. Can we call flying jellyfish UFOs? Yes, we can. They are unidentified, they're flying, and they're objects. The Dutch flying jellyfish is a type of UFO sighted in the Netherlands by Harry Purton. The sighting prompted speculation on what the creature really was. Harry Purton went out after a storm to take photographs for his blog. He was not expecting to capture pictures of anything unusual, but he was surprised upon checking his camera when he got home. He spotted what appeared to be a jellyfish UFO floating in the dark skies of Groningen, Netherlands. It was green colored, and it looked like, something from another planet. He said, "I was taking photos and suddenly something flashed. At first I thought it must have been my camera, but the flash was not up and there was not a drop on my lens." Thinking about the flash, Purton dismissed it as probably being just lightning on the horizon. Once he got home, he began sorting his images, and he noticed one had a jellyfish-shaped thing floating through the sky. Blowing the image up, it looked more like a living creature than an explainable anomaly. Folks seeing the flying jellyfish tend to shy away from calling them UFOs. It might be the old cryptid enthusiasts don't get along with UFO people. This hostile attitude amongst folks who look for strange things is beyond me. Purton's photo prompted plenty of speculation online. Some people think the object could be a small meteorite or a space debris with a green hue around it, possibly caused by electrostatic buildup as the mysterious thing passes through the clouds. Others think the object could be a new rocket-powered vehicle currently being tested by NASA, while some think that the object was the effect caused by lens flare. The photo does look like a solid object and not something caused by light. That's why, when taking paranormal photos, it's a good idea to take several shots of any object you're aiming at, and not just one. If it's a lens flare, it will show up in all of the images taken at the same time. If you see something anomalous in just one photo, but not in any of the others, well, then you might just have something. Instead of thinking that the mysterious object he captured on his camera is an extraterrestrial aircraft, Purton thinks that it was likely something meteorological. His opinion was that a ray of sun might have peeked through the storm clouds, creating the effect that eventually showed up in his images. According to a British scientist, Dr. Maggie Elderin Pocock, aliens likely exist, and this is what's in the image. It's often speculated that when the atmospheric beasts die, they fall to Earth as a gelatinous mass that may resemble green, purple, gray, or iridescent jelly that evaporates into nothing within minutes, hours, or maybe a few days. This is supposed to explain a type of anomalous event called Petrozavodsk. That's Pwdreser. You try pronouncing it. Petrozavodsk that puzzled scientists for some time before they decided that this substance didn't exist. We don't know what it is, and so therefore it can't possibly exist. Petrozavodsk is Welsh for rot from the stars. This phenomena is also known as gelatinous meteorites or star jelly, and reports of it come from around the world, not just from Wales. Gelatinous meteorites are not always connected with atmospheric beast theory. They are actually easier to find among collections of Forteana that include reports of many different odd things falling from the sky. This atmospheric beast is from the speculative documentary Alien Planet, where it is intelligent creature. The atmospheric beasts or things that sound like them are minor characters in the folklore of many regions. They are often given local names. The English is often named the boneless or shapeless, and they resemble a small patch of living, animated fog. Unlike fog, it can be felt as a semi-solid mass. The jellyfish anomaly of Petrus, oh boy, Russian name, Petrozavodsk, was one of the first well-documented sightings of atmospheric jellyfish, a type of atmospheric beast that was sighted by hundreds of local people, including Yuri Gromov and Nikolai Milov, above the skies of Petrozavodsk, Russia, on September 20th, 1977. The sighting prompted speculation on what the creature really was. For my few Russian listeners out there, I'm sorry I'm butchering that name, but it's not like anything I've ever tried to pronounce before. Well, actually, doing the show, it's like a lot of other words I've butchered, but, well, like I've told people before, I can barely speak English, let alone Russian or Chinese or all the other languages that I keep encountering. In 1977, the Soviet party paper Pravda announced, without a suggestion of a doubt, an intensely radiant star which looked like a shining jellyfish stood above Petrosovsk. It moved slowly, throwing rays of light on the city. There were thousands of beams, and it looked like a heavy rain. Early risers in Petrozavodsk, the capital of Karelian, saw a bright light suddenly appear amid the clouds at about 4:05 a.m. The star-like light came nearer and descended in a spiral trajectory and soon looked like a ball of fire. It began reducing its speed and finally hovered for about 6 minutes over one spot. For anyone who had not noticed it before, they noticed it now, for it made a terrible noise like the howling of a siren. This brings to mind the sky trumpets heard all over the world. Of course, the boys in the white lab coats call them skyquakes, even though there are no tectonic plates up there to cause quakes. The howling stopped and the object started moving silently towards the town. Soon it looked like a reddish-orange hemisphere surrounded by a bright zone, in which there were many points of light like stars that twinkled and disappeared. The light began to pulsate. A beam of light came out like a telescope from the bottom of the object, vertically downwards, followed by a second, less bright beam. After a time, both the beams disappeared. During the next few seconds, hundreds of tiny rays of light, like tiny arrows, were showered upon the earth. People who had until then watched the spectacle fascinated now broke into a panic. They ran around the streets, throwing themselves to the ground. Some workers in the harbor thought that it was an American nuclear attack and began shouting that it was the end of the world. A TASS correspondent, Nikolai Milov, who interviewed hundreds of people, soon afterwards said, people looked as if they had suddenly become sick. They gave the impression of being mentally disturbed. People who had been sleeping said that at this moment they had been suddenly awakened and had an unpleasant feeling. Some suffered from nightmares and depression afterwards. Most of them said they had felt an electric current inside their bodies. The thing now looked like a big jellyfish with golden tentacles shining in beautiful colors. The white glow around the hemisphere had shrunk to a shining ring. The beams of light came down to earth in a slight curve. They drilled thousands of holes in the asphalt and in window panes. Some of the people estimated the diameter of the object at about 300 feet. They said it came down closer and closer, and finally it was hovering just above the harbor. It was shining so bright it hurt the eyes to look at it. A smaller and brighter object in the shape of an electric light bulb detached itself from the jellyfish and flew over the roofs and between houses along the street. Later, some people saw this bulb-shaped object return to the mothership and disappear inside of it. A doctor said that while he was looking at the object, his car suddenly broke down. The air was filled with the smell of ozone. A little later, the beam came to an end, and the source of light changed into a brightness and moved towards Onsko Lake. Onsko Lake? On the horizon were gray clouds, and when the object went into these, a number of semicircles and circles of pink light appeared. The manifestation lasted 10 to 12 minutes. The paper was careful to not use the term UFO in any of its writings. Yuri Gromov, director of the meteorological station at Petrozavodsk, Petrosavodsk, not nearly enough vowels, said, "You know what happens if you don't have enough vowels? You become consonanted." Okay, the body gradually assumed the shape of an elliptical ring. It finally moved towards the banks of clouds above Onsko Lake, burned a red hole in the cloud, and disappeared into it. The whole show had lasted for about 12 minutes. Whatever it was, at least the meteorologist Gromov ruled out the possibility of it being a ball of lightning or an aerial reflection. At the time, there were no aircraft or helicopters in the airspace above the city. Gromov said, "In my opinion, it was either a UFO, the messenger of higher intelligence with crew and passengers, or a field of energy that came from a UFO." During the next couple of weeks, over 1,500 letters were sent to the authorities and to TASS agency, expressing worry and concern. How safe is it to stay in the city? Or, is the journey to the Karelian capital dangerous? How high is the radioactivity? All these letters, as well as eyewitness reports in the archives of TASS, were confiscated by government officials. All references to this topic were forbidden, and scientists were forced to investigate the case in secret. Vasil Sokrochenko, the publisher of the magazine Technique and Youth, who had good connections with government sources, said, "The Commission of Academy of Sciences has found that the holes in the stones and the window panes give the impression that the glass has been melted. The holes were the size of a coin. The window of a factory in the city, perforated in such a way, were sent to Moscow for analysis. The results of the analysis were given out only towards the end of 1981 by Dr. V.G. Eshansa during a lecture. He said, "In many of the windows of the houses in the town, there appeared holes the size of 2 to 3 inches in diameter, whose borders showed signs of melting. Circular pieces of glass of the panes of inner windows were missing or lay on the ground or the windowsill. The analysis was interesting. Under the electron microscope, they discovered a crystalline structure on the surface of the non-crystalline glass. They said it was impossible, but it was there. It remained a mystery. The only possibility was that mysterious objects had been active. Years later, samples of these glass pieces were also shown to experts in the West. In 1987, the astronomer Dr. Dale Cruikshank and a sociologist, David Swift of the University of Hawaii, were allowed to see the glass pieces at the Academy of Sciences in Moscow. They confirmed the existence of a crystalline structure at the edges of the holes, as did the chemist Professor Manfred Cage of the Institute for Scientific Photography at Schloss Wissenstein near Stuttgart, who later examined one pane with a number of holes. The sensation caused by the Petrozavodsk incident compelled the scientific establishment to take action. The president of the Academy of Sciences formed a special committee to be led by the Academy member W. Muglin. The commission took up the job of investigating the case, albeit with very little enthusiasm. After a superficial study, they came to the conclusion that the holes were the results of a still unknown natural atmospheric phenomenon, possibly in connection with human technology, for instance, a rocket launch. As a matter of fact, during the time in question, at about 4:03, a rocket had been launched carrying a spy satellite, Cosmos 955, at Plestek, about 200 miles east of Petrozavodsk. Yep, I'm going to have to say that name at least a dozen more times before I get done here. It seems obvious that this rocket could not have been the cause of the phenomenon. The shining jellyfish was sighted west of the city, and it moved underneath the clouds long after the rocket had passed through the stratosphere. No rocket leaves behind thousands of holes in glass and asphalt, and as to what kind of atmospheric phenomena could have been, nothing was said. All that had been established was that it was not an extraterrestrial object because it could not have been one. I don't believe it, so therefore it cannot be true. They call themselves scientists. When did science stop looking for answers? When did they stop looking at anomalies? It's gotten to a point where most scientists will spend their time in the lab just looking at things and saying it's all common matter. Fortunately, Muglin confessed in his own personal dissatisfaction about the matter in an interview with the Soviet journal The Week. He said, "I confess that the insufficient investigation of this case is our fault. Many serious scientists try their best to circumvent speculative problems. The story of science shows that little or no knowledge exists regarding such problems simply because their investigation carries with it the danger of losing a lot of time and, even more than that, one's reputation. Neither I nor my colleagues were, therefore, particularly enamored with the task of examining this case when ordered to do so by the president of the Academy. The investigation was conducted by researchers of the Leningrad Arctic and Antarctic Institute, the Geophysical Institute of Obrinsk, and a number of geologists, meteorologists, and experts from the Air Force and the Navy. Irrespective of what it was, they were at least able to trace the route of the mysterious object almost without any gaps. Between 3:06 and 3:10 a.m., police officers in the Finnish capital Helsinki had reported sighting a bright ball of fire which hovered over the airport for 4 minutes, and then it began moving eastwards. This was also confirmed by the radar at the control tower of the Helsinki airport. A little later, the author Living Nemoyov, 20 miles northwest of Petrus saw it through the telescope. He described the UFO as a lens-shaped object, shining violet and surrounded by shining ring. It had bright pulsing rays of light coming out of it like the tentacles of the Medusa jellyfish. At 3:30 a.m., fishermen at the Onsko Lake near Primovsk saw a bright light in the sky which was surrounded by a kind of haze. At 4 a.m., employees at the observatory in Pulkovo saw the ball of fire in the north, as well as a pilot in a passenger plane flying from Kiev to Leningrad. After its appearance over the capital, they sighted the disk above Yandevar, south of Karelian capital. At Polovina, 15 miles east of the capital, people saw a cloud changing color at 4:40 a.m. as if it had been lit up by a source of light from inside of it. In 1978, the Soviet party paper Pravda announced, without a suggestion of a doubt, an intensely radiant star which looked like a shining jellyfish stood above the capital city. It moved slowly, throwing rays of light on the city. There were thousands of beams, and it looked like a heavy rainstorm. A little later, the beaming came to an end, and the source of the light changed its brightness and moved towards Onsko Lake. On the horizon there were gray clouds, and when the object went into these, a number of semicircular and circular pink lights appeared. This manifestation lasted about 10 to 12 minutes. Nobody knows exactly what it was that they saw, but it was reported in the newspapers, and it was seen by thousands. A flying jellyfish was sighted in Norway by Per Ann Milkolsen. The sighting prompted speculation on what the creature really was. A strange jellyfish-shaped object spotted hanging in the air over Norway may have been caused by light from the aurora borealis being bounced off a space satellite. If this was the case, it would be the first time a satellite was reflecting the northern lights. Satellites tend to be positioned a lot higher than the aurora borealis. The mysterious phenomenon was photographed by amateur photographer Per Arne Milkelsen over Andensem, Norway. He had become fascinated with the aurora after working at a rocket launch site in the far north of Norway for 25 years. The northern lights are often visible there because it is so close to the North Pole. Aurora are caused by interaction of solar winds with Earth's magnetic field, and so are particularly prevalent at the poles, where the magnetic forces are the strongest. I got to see the aurora borealis one time while camping up near the Canadian border. If you've never seen them, you should make it a point to go and look. It's a fascinating display of lights. Mr. Mickelson told the Mail Online, "I've never seen an object like this before, and I'm eager to find an explanation to the phenomenon." The photographer first assumed the odd optical effect was a spot on his camera lens. After he posted the photographs on spaceweather.com, he was inundated with emails from interested experts from around the world. A lead scientist, Truls Line Hansen from Tromsø Geophysical Observatory, said he doubted the picture taken on January 20th was due to simple camera fault. He told the Mail Online, "The phenomena has the same greenish color as the northern lights." Mr. Hansen said it was unlikely the northern lights could create the optical effect on its own. Instead, the aurora might be bouncing off an external source, like a satellite. In this way, it would act like an iridium flare. The flares are created by sunlight reflecting off iridium satellites. They appear as bright white flashes in the sky. One minor problem with this theory is that the light intensity from the northern lights is 100,000 times weaker than sunlight. Hansen said this did not exclude the satellite reflection hypothesis. He wants it to be the answer no matter what. Most experts want to be able to explain anything and everything in their field of expertise. When things pop up that they can't make go away, they tend to reach for anything, even remotely scientific sounding, so most folks will think the anomaly has been explained away, allowing the expert to remain an expert. In 1985, an Aeroflot plane reported sighting a bright light while flying over Minsk en route from Tbilisi to Tallinn. The mysterious light was sighted again December 24, 1999. The light slowly changed into a cigar-shaped UFO. This sighting was above Vitebsk, Belarus. This particular creature exhibited bioluminescent and semi-transparent qualities similar to that of a jellyfish or a squid. The cigar-shaped UFO, bright blue and red, the color of the clouds at sunset, at first was believed to be an aircraft, but without any wings or a tail. The front profile was rounded and asymmetrical. The rear part seemed blurred. It was observed by 2 witnesses. This object was moving northeast. There was no noise at all. After 3 or 4 seconds, the object suddenly vanished. The witnesses said the object was not an aircraft because of the strange color, the slight fluorescence, the enormous angular size, the speed, the strange disappearance, and there was no sound coming from the thing. There was no impression of a real solid object. It was more like an image, maybe semi-transparent. According to testimony supplied by UFO Sightings Daily, a Toronto witness reported that he saw a jellyfish UFO April 12, 2012. Mr. Waring noted this area is where jellyfish UFO sightings have been seen the most. He said it's a very popular UFO shape that has been seen around the world that looks like a jellyfish UFO that is relatively prominent in Russia. He said a witness said that the thing came down from above the cloud, slowly descending for about a minute before he began filming. I tried to find the video, but I couldn't. I didn't try all that hard since I've already spent more time on this show than normal and, well, I've only got so many hours in a week to do things. Even NASA has accidentally released a few videos and photographs of flying jellyfish. The folks at Never a Straight Answer quickly tried to explain these away as just about everything from space debris to camera malfunctions. In late December 2012, NASA cameras recorded a strange object in the sky. January 31st, 2013, the Alien Disclosure Group, while analyzing NASA footage, discovered this anomaly, and they uploaded their findings onto their website and later to YouTube. Could space be filled with living creatures just like our oceans? Some of the footage and pictures seems to suggest that this is so. November 10th, 2013, Scott Waring discovered a new sighting of atmospheric jellyfish in the NASA archives. He said, "Throughout UFO history, jellyfish UFOs with long moving tentacles have been recorded and reported around the world. This is a great example of such a UFO. Notice the beam of light coming down towards Earth from the tentacles, and also notice there seems to be a wide stream behind the UFO from which it came. With thousands, yes, I said that correctly, thousands of UFOs and structures being found in old NASA photos. There are plenty of reports of UFOs to go around, and they are mostly described as a mechanical craft of some sort. Either alien, man-made, or something else, but they look manufactured. There is a subspecies of UFO reports that doesn't get nearly as much attention, and this is the strange thing in the sky that seems to be almost living. Bioluminescent creatures of some sort. These creatures have appeared sporadically throughout the history of UFO sightings and typically appear as glowing, translucent jellyfish, squid, or other creatures that seem to belong in the deep waters rather than flying around up in the air. The Alien Disclosure Group went on to point out sightings like these have gone back for years. In the 1950s, a police constable in England said he had a run-in with a low-flying sky jellyfish as he was riding his bicycle on patrol. He reported it drifted right down in front of him and he bumped up against it, describing the sensation as similar to brushing up against a soft blanket. The flying jellyfish had a slightly unpleasant smell of mildew. In 1958, there was a report from Florida where a policeman named Faustino Gallegos found a translucent purple blob about the size of a soccer ball outside his house. He said when he approached it, it seemed to be some kind of a dying creature. He picked it up, and the thing just sort of evaporated in his hands. He did not report any kind of a physical feeling afterwards. He didn't get sick or anything along those lines. I had to flip a coin on whether to use this next story. It sounded a bit, well, no, a lot, like somebody's bad dream after eating too much of something bad for you. I imagine the looks on some of my listeners' faces as they heard what I'm about to read. Well, then I thought, why limit my show, ignoring such a wild and entertaining account? If nothing else, it should give you a laugh or two. Keep in mind, I discovered this one as being a whole lot of hooey. Around the same time as the report from Florida, Pai Guevara said his uncle, Oscar Guevara, had taken part in a scientific survey of these sorts of creatures in the 1950s and 60s. The remote areas north of San Francisco had apparently experienced a spat of sightings for over a decade of what were usually referred to as space jellies, which would congregate in the upper atmosphere along the coast, after which they would soar up into the upper atmosphere out of sight. Pai provided a letter that he had received from his uncle, which outlines the phenomenon and his study of it. The letter said, "This coalescence of space jellies, as we call them, was assumed to be part of a seasonal migration pattern in and about Western Pacific. With a small joint grant fund from several philanthropic scientific organizations, I developed a small, high-altitude, long-distance, ultralight aircraft which was assisted by an in-flight deployable and detachable ovoid helium balloon. This platform was developed as it had because evident through observation and experimentation that the behavior of these creatures was disturbed by the approach of large aircraft. It was not by coincidence that this craft bore a distinct resemblance to the large, presumably mature form of the space jelly creatures themselves. Working with a shoestring budget, I deployed a modified aqualung attached to a motorcycle helmet and a small forge bellows that was fashioned into a crude but effective and lightweight rebreathing system for high altitude. For warmth, I wore a gorilla suit procured from a costumer auction in Emeryville and had it filled with a lining of goose down. From below, the aircraft was lowered a fair-sized grappling hook with several large mackerel tied to it with baling wire. Inside of 6 weeks in the fall of 1973, I had snagged most of these diaphanous jellyfish like buggers. None of the captured survived the experience and within minutes dissolved into an odd steamy smoke. On my final expedition, as per standard operating procedures, I reached the specified location at the altitude of 9,500 feet, deployed the balloon, and floated up into the remaining few of these creatures, which apparently died of fright on the spot, dissolving into thread-like wisps before me. Besides the regrettable loss of the subjects under study, there was one more unfortunate circumstance. On the last mission after jettisoning the balloon, I was flying in from the Pacific over the Farallones at about 5,000 feet towards my hidden base of operations in a remote area of, the location was redacted. I was spotted by a Navy crew on a practice and shakedown cruise flying a restored antique consolidated PBY Coronado that was to be deployed in a few days at a Fleet Week exposition near Fisherman's Wharf. They veered off course, followed me, and executed a close and slow pass-by over San Francisco Bay. So close I could see the faces of the pilot and crew. The flying boat then abruptly dropped altitude and beached near the Mar Island Naval Shipyard in what, for all intent and purposes, appeared to be an emergency landing. Weeks later, I learned through some Navy sources in Viejo, who hung out Fridays at a location, which was redacted, a bar and grill, that the pilot and crew recovered from the plane had babbled incoherently, and for days all they could get out of them was flying fish bear, flying fish bear. Needless to say, this story has never been declassified and likely never will. The only reason I relate it now is to lay rest any fears that may still exist about these creatures, and confident in the knowledge that no one in their right mind would ever actually believe it. The story sounded so outlandish I wasn't going to use it, but why deprive you folks of such a good story, even if a whole lot bizarre and probably not true? The flying gorilla with a motorcycle helmet kind of makes me think of the movie Robot Monster from 1953. Directed by Phil Tucker, the robot looked more like a gorilla with a fishbowl on his head. He had some antenna sticking up out of it, and, well, they didn't have a real big budget. I got to thinking, some of the outside-the-box researchers and scientists out there, some of the best minds also seem to be some of the most entertaining when it comes to day-to-day things. People who are super wow brilliant sometimes act like little kids. In 1998, there was a mass sighting of some sort of jellyfish flying over China. October 19th, 4 military radar stations in Hebei province picked up a strange radar signature hovering near a military pilot training school in Changzhou, about 90 miles northwest of Shanghai. 2 Jinzhou 6 jet fighters were scrambled and sent to investigate. As they approached the unknown object, both the pilots and the radar officers on the jets said they saw what looked like a mushroom or jellyfish-shaped object with a bottom section covered with bright dangling lights. The unknown object proved to be very evasive. As the jet fighters approached, the jellyfish-looking craft rose straight into the air. It moved too fast for the jets to keep up. The pilots contacted flight control and requested permission to fire on the jellyfish. Flight control said no for some reason known only to them. The flying jellyfish then began to descend. Once it was level with the fighters, it began to fly away just fast enough that the fighters couldn't catch up to it. It sounds as if the thing was trying to be seen while not seen too well, like it was toying with them. The fighters stayed on the flying jellyfish tail until fuel became a problem. The fighters had to break off and return to base. There were 140 witnesses all watching this strange aerial display. A second and third jet were launched to try dealing with the flying jellyfish. As they passed the returning fighters, the jellyfish vanished over the horizon. With so many witnesses all watching this strange aerial display, the story wound up on the front page of the newspaper. China is not known for printing anything paranormal or otherworldly, no matter how many people see it. They kind of like to tell folks what to think, kind of like what's going on over here today. Two witnesses were driving from Point Pleasant, the home of the Mothman, to Huntington, West Virginia, along the Ohio River, December 3rd, 2004. As they drove along in the early evening, they noticed a movement over the road in front of them. Out of the gloom came a grayish, smooth-winged shape that they described as looking like a flying manta ray, with gray translucent skin and a wingspan of about 2 lanes of the road. The weird-looking beast simply glided towards them and then performed a figure-8 maneuver and swooped right over their car before disappearing. Not long after this sighting, there was another report from a woman and her daughter near Blackwater River, West Virginia, who also saw what they called a flying manta ray-shaped creature. This bizarre thing passed over their car on a lonely rural road. This sounds so much like the flying manta ray seen in Laredo, Texas in 2013. The witness was driving past Lake Casablanca when a 3-foot-wide thing flew over his car. He said it looked just like a manta ray. Manta ray do not look like jellyfish. I included these here because the idea of sea creatures flying around the skies is just too weird to ignore. Anything that should swim in the water, yet is seen in the sky, needs looking into. In Perth, Australia, a witness said in 2012 he was out in front of his house one evening having a cigarette when his attention was drawn to a curious sight of light patterns of the stars being disrupted by something passing between him and them. At first he thought it was an airplane, but it soon became apparent that this was no aircraft. The witness said, as it got closer, the way it moved resembled the way jellyfish would swim if it was horizontal. It was hard to describe, but it looked to be expanding at the front like a balloon, and then using that air to propel itself along. It was roughly 100 meters above me, and I watched it for 10 minutes. After that, it was out of sight. This was on a clear night sky in Australia. He said he is familiar with aircraft as he lived close to the Jandakot Airport and he said he sees airplane and he hears airplanes all the time. It was certainly not a machine of any kind. He yelled out to his mother-in-law, who was staying at the time, and came out and have a look, as she also saw this weird flying creature. He filmed it on his smartphone, but it was so late at night that the darkness of the sky and the darkness of the creature, it just didn't come out. If he had to guess, he said, he would say that the feeling he was left with was that it was some kind of a living, breathing animal, something alive. He said it moved gracefully and gradually in a large, deliberate movement, kind of like how a large bird will flap its wings and then glide for a while. There was a follow-up report from 2 other witnesses who also saw something over Perth. The pair were sitting on a balcony of a 2-story restaurant at about 9 or 10 o'clock at night. They were enjoying the night, eating and listening to music. Glancing up, one of them pointed out a weird-shaped object in the sky. The 2 sat and watched as what looked like a jellyfish flew across the sky. At first, they were not going to mention seeing anything, not wanting to be considered crazy. Once the first report was printed on a website, they decided to tell their story as well. We have far more questions than answers after looking into flying jellyfish and manta ray. A lot of folks believe there just might be a living creature that can survive way up in the stratosphere where oxygen is scarce. The idea of something being able to live where there is no oxygen can be explained as being like the creatures of the deep who live where nothing should be able to survive. Yet they're down there. There would have to be some kind of a food source way up there, unless these creatures come down to the ground looking for food in the dark of night. If this is the case, going out at night will take on a whole new level of concern. Standing outside in your yard when a bunch of tentacles grab you and yank you up into the sky, where you're going to be eaten by giant flying beasts. Other people say the flying jellyfish are actually spacecraft. The images are being broadcast to make the ships look like living creatures. A form of camouflage that instead of blending in, it makes the observer see something else. Could the projected image be used to cause people to become afraid, seeing a weird flying creature, allowing the unknown entities to feed on this fear? Another thought along the same lines is we don't know what a spaceship needs to look like, especially if it's coming from another star system. Maybe the flying jellyfish is how the craft look. How about a living spaceship? Did you watch the TV show Farscape? The crew traveled around inside a living spaceship called Moya. I know it was just a TV show. It's the idea of a living or semi-living entity that is being used as a means of conveyance. There are some things out there that make no sense to us because we are taught from a young age to think along certain lines and ignore anything outside these lines. There's a reason a lot of people don't believe anything outside the box. It could be called training or indoctrination. Those in charge don't want people looking into things that just might elevate us to their level. Just a thought. In the book Stardust Ranch, John went into a lot of thought on how the entertainment industry will put out stories to make people associate the unknown with Hollywood fiction. Most people today think of the Men in Black as just a comedy. I'm surprised that nobody out there in La La Land has made a movie about flying jellyfish. So any and all reported sightings would be written off as being caused by the movies. Oh, that's just something you saw on TV. I hope this show doesn't make you too nervous to step outside in the dark at night. Then again, it just might save your life. As you're standing outside smoking a cigarette or looking up at the stars, keep an eye out for tentacles and giant jellyfish. If you'd like to contact me with ideas for the show or stories for my next book, you can reach me at strangethings@arcanasa.com. Until next Saturday, this is Chris James.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.